So let me start by, first of all, extending a really, really deep gratitude to our expert speakers today. This event, online event, is to commemorate and mark International Women's Day. The title of this set of deliberations is Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow. And this is a slogan, international slogan from the United Nations that we have selected. And our deliberations today are roughly, if you like, they roughly span four key areas or key thematic areas. The first key thematic area is women's right to access constitutional rights in newly merged areas of Pakistan. We would then hear on NCHR, National Commission for Human Rights, addressing the needs of women in incarceration and in need of shelter. We also have the Digital Rights Foundation with us, who would share their reflections, findings, recommendations on making internet a safer space for women. And last but not the least, we have with us an independent human rights defender who would share her reflections, findings, observations, and any recommendations on the issue of data around violence against women. So without further ado, let me introduce the speakers first. Our first panelist, expert guest speaker is Madam Rakshanda Naz, Ombudsperson, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Madam Rakshanda Naz is also part of the women's movement in Pakistan. For all those who are aware of or familiar with the women's movement in Pakistan, for them, Madam Rakshanda Naz's name is not any strange or a new name. She's been on the forefront of women's rights movement in Pakistan. She has also been part of civil society organizations. In her own personal capacity, she's a human rights lawyer. She brings in a very vast experience of working with non-governmental organizations, with women's movement, working with the most disenfranchised individuals across Pakistan, but also assisting and supporting the UN system and other international development partners. Madam, very, very welcome to you. If you could switch your mic on, and we are all here and we are all ears. I know that you're going to share your reflections on the issue of newly merged areas of Pakistan and the issue of access to constitutional rights, in particular focusing on women and girls. Over to you, madam.
Thank you, and assalamu alaikum everyone again. And actually my association with the merged district is, I just want to share my personal experience, because I grew up in an area where we experience two type of law in this region. Particularly, there was a different law for the tribal districts, and then on the other side that there was a different law for the settled districts. Now, thanks to 25th constitutional amendment, now the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is one Pakhtunkhwa. So in my career, when I start working as a pro bono lawyer, so I realized most of human rights laws were not extended to the tribal districts at that time. And then particularly when the government of Pakistan, under access to justice introduced lot of new legislation. For example, the one law was habeas corpus, devolve powers of habeas corpus at the district level. So I was conducting my study, and I realized, and I find some of the court judgments where the court said we don't have our jurisdiction towards in the tribal area. At that time, it was FATA, federally administered tribal areas. And the second reason was for then I joined the group who was working for the FATA reform. So I was on my credit, there was another experience when the women in the tribal districts, they were not allowed to vote. So in 1997, when the government of Pakistan, they extended electoral right to the federal in the FATA. So thank God, now all the laws, they extended to the tribal districts or emerged areas. And two, three things I want to bring into the notice, because I know keeping the time in mind as well. The one thing, because there are two type of people, one are pro FATA and another like us, we were for the FATA reform. So after constitution implementation of or a merger of FATA, when the district administration or the establishment department, they appointed three women assistant commissioner in the Khyber district. That was the breakthrough for us, because we were looking how we will gauge the women progress in that area, because at the same time there were women IDPs from South and North Waziristan, and already IDPs among, because why I'm saying women, because when I was collecting testimony from either they were in Gulf area for their jobs, or in some areas there was reason was not known. So somehow I'm not saying the men were not there. Actually, I reconnect, so it's
Uh-huh.
muted. Anyhow, basically, uh, the second breakthrough was when the UNDP, they started their work, and at that time the going women setting up women gender desk in the tribal districts. At the same time, the ombudsperson office, we set up our network of focal persons with lawyers from the law department and the social welfare officers from the social welfare department. So while interacting with women, and it was also we realize there is a very slight difference in the accessibility, because the accessibility from the merged district is still a problem because of the technology, because of literacy rate, because of limited resources from the government side, because you can see the budget in the annual development program, but still the budget reserved for these areas need to enhance in terms of human resource in the government institutions, and at the same time budgetary allocation, because we are talking about the women in the area, and the people in a marginalized area, their needs are much higher as compared to the people living in the north of KP or in other settled districts. Then the other issue, because the people deployed in these institutions, we realized, particularly when I was conducting training, how the focal person will help women area of harassment at the workplace, because we were very much focused, because the government is very determined to create spaces for women in the government job. But at the same time, the institutional biases are there, because when I was conducting that session, so some of the my own focal person during training, they said, if women don't put too much makeup, then there will be no harassment. So, when people are sitting with this attitude, or they believe most of the women rights are donor agenda, so it's very difficult to implement the law sometime, even you are on a higher position. But somehow I'm very happy to share, because most of the focal persons now, they are more active than the people sitting in the ombudsperson secretariat because of interaction. So I think that the second area or challenge in the area is because women have limited access to technology, entertainment. Very few women in the family, they have time to watch TV program. Their only accessibility is radio, and we utilize this radio, and we see and we are receiving application, because women, they say, we heard this program. And even from Miransha, when we received application and from Kohistan, that was because of the radio access. Then the institutional capacity, because the tribal districts are still very hard in some of the areas. The government offices lack basic facility. So most of the people, they try to avoid their postings in the tribal districts, so except for the district administration, because I'm talking about where people have to deliver their services in terms of access to justice. Already Peshawar High Court, they sent their requisition to the law department, because they are saying, after when the dismantle they abolished the Fata tribunal. So now all the family courts are extended to the tribal district. So they said, we don't have a staff, we don't have judicial officer. So they sent their demand for 250 judges only at the at the subordinate judiciary. So this is basically, and the at this is not in terms of judiciary. At the same time, under the criminal justice system, because in overall the women in police are very less. So now, because there was no culture of women in the FC Frontier Corps or levies, because there were no women. So now the women in the institutions, from education to health, and health to police and judiciary, because we are far behind to achieve even our 10% quota given in the in the government jobs. At the same time, government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, they introduced two more quotas. One is 5% quota for non-Muslim Pakistani is in the job, and 2% quota for trans. So, I'm talking about all three quotas. Against all three quotas, we don't have women in against the job. If you are if there are news about women assistant commissioners in district administration, because now in KP you can see the women on these position. All women are on the journal and they compete on a journal seats or a journal post in so we still have spaces for women where we need to fill these spaces, and women can no, for both sides, because the one is the women should excel in on a positions where they can utilize their expertise. At the same time, women culturally it's very feasible in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. We realize women are coming to women police station as compared to women in our journal police stations. So at the same time, the two developments I want to share. One is the first woman appointed as station master at the Peshawar radio station, and the AIG at the police headquarter. So I think these things now need to trickle down in a at the lower level, and particularly in the tribal districts as well, because the women from the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, they prove if they can be AIG or a journal or on a other position, so why not they and already women are serving within the district administration and now the judiciary. Then there is another area, because the KP human right policy, they have very limited portion for the merge areas in their plan, and then the women and human right defenders, because the human right defenders also need to support in these areas, because if we are talking about access to justice and the accessibility, so they can play a role of bridge between the state institution and at the same time creating awareness at the grassroots level. And then there is another, I think the KP women empowerment policy also need to enhance in terms of right-based approach, because the KP women empowerment policy, when this policy was notified, at that time tribal women were missing, because there was only one representation in the NCHR and the one representation in the NCSW. So I think now the tribal representation should be enhanced, not only in the KPCSW, but the our policy need to revise, because both the local government act at that time. Now this is entire KP, so this is applicable, but we emphasize there is, because the women from the merged districts, they are far behind as compared to women from Sawabi, Mardan, Charsadda, Noshara, and Peshawar. So I think there is a need to have some affirmative action policy to enhance women role in government and service delivery or as a duty bearers. And at the same time, we have to focus on one and very important area to focus. One is under the legal rights, and another women economic rights, because we experienced in the FATA secretariat most of our development budgets were lapsed. Even FATA development authority in the past, they make a very slight change in the status of women. So for the women in the merged districts, need to have affirmative action policy. For that reason, at least from our office, we announce our regional offices from that area. Already we submitted our requisition to the P&D department. At the same time, the meeting at the federal level, we asked for 6 regional offices where women can access to ombudsperson secretariat through their regional offices. So with our team, we decided we will start our regional offices from the tribal districts where women can access. So this is, so I will leave rest of the my information for discussion session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Rakshandanaz, Ombudsperson Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, for your very nuanced observations, sharing of your lived experience, but equally highlighting the challenges, the way forward, and recommendations. It's truly heartening to hear that you are in the process of planning your sub-regional ombudsperson's offices, in particular at the newly merged areas. I think there's much, much more that we could explore further, and we look forward to having this deliberation as a continued platform of dialogues. Ladies and gentlemen, my next expert guest speaker is none other than the chairperson of National Commission for Human Rights, Pakistan, Madam Rabia Javeri. Madam Rabia Javeri is a seasoned bureaucrat, but beyond that, she has had a track record of working with and for women across Pakistan, in particular in Sindh, where she worked for women's economic empowerment. While she was secretary of the Federal Ministry of Human Rights, a very, very significant report was guided and supervised by her. And the report titled as Plight of Women in Pakistan's Prisons. It was submitted to the Prime Minister Imran Khan on August 26, 2020. The report found that the Pakistan's prison laws did not meet international standards and that officials often ignored laws which meant to protect women prisoners. It had some very startling statistics also. For example, of the 1,121 women in prison, as of mid 2020, 66% had not been convicted of any offense and were detained while awaiting conclusion of their trial. The report also highlighted that more than 300 women were detained in facilities outside the districts where they lived, making family visits nearly impossible. The report also highlighted that the prisoners included 46 women over the age of 60 and 10 girls under the age of 18. Only 24 female health workers were available to provide full-time care to women and girls in prisons across the country. We would like to hear from Madam Rabia Javeri, who oversaw the data collection for and development of this report, and now as the chair of the National Commission for Human Rights in Pakistan, if there are any further reflections on this, or from her own vintage position, if there are any recommendations or further, if you like, reflections that you would like to bring in order to address these issues. Madam Rabia Javeri, over to you.
Mr. Manri, thank you, Salman. Just to give you a quick overview, I inherited the National Commission for Human Rights after hiatus about 2.5 years. The commission that we've inherited has huge limitations with regard to human resources and to finances. And I think one of the things that we thought of was how do we, within our limited scope, prioritize on where we want to go. And the philosophy or the thinking behind it was, let's target the most vulnerable. And who are the most vulnerable? Let's do our work, which is focused to those people who have no voice or no access, no platform, and let the commission be that platform for them. So the first thing we targeted was minorities. Among minorities, who is the most vulnerable were the sanitary workers in the minorities. Use of the quota system, misuse of the quota system in the hiring of minority workers. Who are the most vulnerable in society were the prisoners. Which of the prisoners were, again, within that category, women prisoners, foreign women prisoners. Again, in society, who was the most vulnerable? People who face mental health issues, who have, again, there's stigma, so much bias, discrimination attached to women who suffer from mental disease. Can we do anything to help them? And finally, we within the supply chain, or whether you want to call it supply chain, or the chain of support to women who face violence, women who seek shelter at shelter homes. So today I really more than prisoners, because that report is still in the offing and we are halfway through it. We are working with in the prison report we are doing is a case study of all the women prisons in Pakistan. I've already been to one, and I have a nationwide intervention to visit every single prison which houses women inmates over the next week. We've been gathering data, some very interesting data on female women prisoners, particularly in Rawalpindi jail. So before we get into, before I publish the findings of that report, I'd like to today to talk about the work that we have already commenced is on women's shelters. And because the conversation today gave me leeway to talk about one or the other, I thought, let me first target something that has also of equally important value. So let me commence with the fact that everyone knows, all of us sitting here, and I think Tahira will talk in detail about how Pakistan has one of the worst numbers with regard to violence against women, and of course how this number has been exacerbated during COVID, when women have been trapped with their abusers, how Pakistan ranks very poorly on the gender ranking and the global gender gap, or in the Reuters, where there are about 90% cases of domestic violence, how data is gathered, how data is not gathered. People do not want to come to the police stations. A lot of violence against women is termed as accidents, and people we do not have the real figures on how bad the situation, despite having a large number of laws for women, supporting affirmative action, penal action for support of women. We still have a really dismal situation of violence against women, compounded by the lack of rule of law, structural inequalities in the system, and a basis insufficient protection system for women. And in that supply chain, shelters are a critical component of the holistic response to survivors. They are the natural sort of chain on how do you address violence against women and how do you protect women. And ideally, women shelters in Pakistan must provide shelter, protection. They must provide services, resources, legal aid, mental and psychological counseling, vocational skills. Awareness raising. Shelters can be agents of change. They can take a position in standing out against violence and patriarchy. Survivors can be role models. And Pakistan, when we started to look at it, we first went to the shelter in Balochistan, and the situation over there is utterly and completely dismal. Balochistan has 3 Benazir centers and 2 Darul Amans. And if you look at the state of the Darul Aman, it is really dismal. It is so dismal that there were 24 women, of which the women said, we're fine to go back home, send us home. Now, the situation of when people come to seek refuge in a state institution to find support from the state and are um, so despondent and feel so trapped that they're ready to go back to their abusers rather than staying in a protection home is alarming. Um, and that brought us, when we went to Balochistan, that brought us into the condition of what can we do? What can we do if we are to protect the vulnerable? And if, and this is where we also reached out to you and to the UNDP for support, is how do we make a system where women who are abused and battered and have nowhere to go can actually find solace. And the first thing that struck us, and this is something that I had personally been connected with when I was Secretary of Women's Development, Sindh. Over there, a case had come of a woman who was housed in Darul Aman, Hyderabad. And the Darul Amans, except for very few shelters in Pakistan, you are not allowed, a resident is not allowed the ability to leave that shelter without a magisterial order. Now, if you don't have a car, if you don't have access to the courts, the times, a lot of time lapses between that woman coming into the shelter and her getting a permission to leave. And the case that came to me when I was Secretary Women's Development in Sindh was of a young girl who, in a desperation to escape Darul Aman, Hyderabad, took the sheets of the room, tied them up, and tried to jump out of the window through those sheets. And the sheets ripped. The woman fell down and the woman died. And that brought into question, and this is a question that is in all the Darul Amans, except for Pana in Karachi, Dastak in Lahore, and the shelter in Islamabad, that there is no exercise of free will. The majority of women come through a court order, leave through a court order. The state becomes the protector. And so how can we create, and this was our role, and this is where we were trying to link with expert support to create standard operating procedures. There is no standard operating procedures. Every shelter runs on the philosophy or the mindset of the people in charge at that center at the moment. So if the mindset is patriarchal, कि घर बैठो, यहीं बैठो, बाहर नहीं निकल सकते, court orders say, if you go out, you don't have any independence to go out, then that underlying principle will determine how the shelter runs. So, and the desperation of the women, obviously in that situation, leads for exploitation, neglect, mistreatment. So what can we do? How can we create a survivor-centered approach? How can we create strong SOPs? How do we create a coordinated humanitarian response to women who, Tahira will tell you all the figures, the numbers, but how do we create a response to this gender-based violence, providing immediate care like medical health, but long-term requirements, skills. Now, the women in Balochistan, for instance, they're ready to go home. They have no skills with them. We know shelter in Pakistan provides any exit data. What happens to women once they leave? Do they get back into that horrible, sort of quicksand of abuse and violence? So how do we monitor them? Do we provide them with alternate livelihood options? Do we have something to define, the follow-up when cases have been closed? What do we do with the issue of most families there are a large number, nearly 46 in every province, of Darul Amans, Benazir centers and protection centers and protection homes. How do we provide for the children survivors within that case? Again, nothing is done. Is there any training? Again, you talked about, we saw the vacancies in prisons, but for instance, the vacancies in shelters, people come on deputation and they leave. In Quetta, 8 out of 17 of the posts are vacant. So that's a huge, huge number. And there is no institutional um, knowledge, because the top management keeps moving, and it's just the lower staff and their philosophy that is replicated. What are the ethical considerations? What is the orientation for legal, medical procedures? How do we crisis management? What is the sensitization of people who receive them? And most of all, what we are looking at is, how do you create referral networks? There is a referral network which is unspoken. Sometimes there's a network with the helpline associated, but there isn't very strong network within the system. There's no linkage from shelter to shelter. So can we create, and this is where the NCHR is looking, is can you create an inter-provincial body to not supervise, because in there the district administration supervises, but maybe to provide the best practices, maybe to create synergies, to be able to share ideas. And then finally, what do you do with women who are disabled who come for shelter? There's no provision whatsoever. So how do you create, how do you help organize a support to a woman who may be disabled who comes for shelter? So these are just some of the various, I'm just sort of rushing through them, but this is an area that we're looking at and that we would like to move forward on it, because it's something where we can provide training, we can look at creating SOPs, we can look at creating synergies, we can look at creating interprovincial central committees. So very quickly, in a nutshell, is what we are now doing with looking at the shelters. And then at a longer time, I'll talk in length about the prison system. Thank you so much, Salman.
Thank you very much, Madam Ravi Javeri, Chair, National Commission for Human Rights, for your clear, concise, and precise overview of women in Darul Amans, women in need of shelters that are people-centered, rights-based, and that provide room for the women who are there, their own flexibility and their own free will. But also thank you very much indeed for some extremely important recommendations that you've made with regards to a coordination mechanism, with regards to creating complementarity and synergy amongst these institutions at various levels, development of SOPs, training, provision of psychosocial support or pro bono legal advisory, and perhaps connecting all of these dots together. Ladies and gentlemen, we move on to our next thematic area of the day today. We know that with the world becoming increasingly digital, it has become even more important to step up action for improving online safety so that everyone can participate equally in the opportunities made available by the internet. As you know, that leveraging the new wave digital activism, women and girls have and are using internet platforms to collectively mobilize and amplify their voices against all forms of social injustices and human rights violations. For example, the Me Too and Time's Up movements against gender-based violence and violence against women and girls, which gained momentum globally, were largely mobilized through digital platforms. However, both the activists and the movements have been targeted by misogynist, sexist cyber attacks. And then the question is that the internet cannot remain an open and democratic space unless all those who want their voices in the platform, on the platform, can do so without fearing for their safety and well-being. And this calls for a need to deliberate on how we can all work together to ensure to make the internet a safe space for all, particularly for women and girls. Online violence and hate speech can have consequences on the meaningful online participation of women and girls. So with this, we have our next speaker, Ms. Sirat Khan, who is a senior manager at the Pakistan Digital Rights Foundation. Thank you, Ms. Khan, for joining us. You have 10 minutes for sharing your reflections with us today. Ms. Khan, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity, and especially with great insights from Ms. Rabia and Ms. Rakshandanas. Specifically talking about the online spaces right now is how we see that digital spheres have really changed now, and we see that online violence has transcended to offline violence. Uh, Talking about women's experiences of the internet, I'd like to highlight how women are targeted specifically for their speech online, and there is a targeted campaign now against women activists, women journalists, and the kind of speech that they have been making. Also about the fact that there's very lower participation in terms of the access to technology that women have. According to a GSMA report in 2021, 52% of adult women have access to a mobile phone, and 21% only have access to the mobile internet. So there's already very limited women on the internet, and then they are also being targeted for their speech and their activism online. We have a cyber harassment helpline. DRF is a cyber harassment helpline which was established in 2016. And through the helpline, we provide three basic services, which is legal aid, psychological help, and legal and digital security systems. And over the last 5 years, not counting 2022, we've had around 12,231 cases on the helpline, and most of them have been of women. And especially during COVID-19, we saw how around there was in basically April 2020 and March 2020, there was a 189% increase in the cases of cyber harassment that women were facing. This was especially happening during the lockdown period when women were trapped in their homes. Their only access to the outside world was their devices, and still they were being targeted for whatever activity that they were doing online. And we also saw that we've done a number of researches with women journalists. Specifically, we have a network of women journalists as a support group for journalists who are targeted online for their speech and for the work that they do. And we conducted a study called Fostering Open Spaces, and with 60 women journalists, and we found that 55% of the respondents were subjected to online abuse and harassment, and 91% of the respondents felt that their abuse that they felt that they were being targeted was very gendered in nature, and it was because of their gender. And another report by the Media Matters of Democracy stated that 9 out of 10 women journalists were more likely to face online violence, and which is why they had to leave these spaces, and not just like public spaces, they couldn't occupy online spaces. So, and apart from that, not just women journalists, we've also done a research on the general elections last year in 2018. Uh, and we found out that most of the speech that was happening regarding women politicians, that was more or less focused on the clothes that they were wearing, their outlook, and not about their political campaigns or their political ambitions. And most of the political comments were mostly subjected to men instead of women. So this is an overall problem that we see with the internet, that how online spaces are very restricted for women now, and especially with this new era of the Me Too we see with the new era. So basically, what I was talking about was how women politicians are also targeted online because, and that's mostly because of the their, not because of their speech or their political ambitions, but mostly because of how they look and how they're clothes. And this is a general problem that we see not just with the internet, but with our society, that there is a patriarchal system, and that resonates on online spaces as well. And because these spaces are not they can be not regulated easily, even though the government is trying to regulate it, but the consequences when they try to regulate it, women are the ones who are, facing the blunt of it. Now, the 2016 Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, when it came out, it was assured to everybody that this is a law that is for women and that will help women. But the same act itself, with the PICA ordinance that we see right now, which is going to criminalize defamation, it's going to have implications for women who are already targeted under the law. Specifically talking about the FIA, because that's the legal body that is dealing with cybercrime cases in Pakistan. Women are scared to go to these bodies because they feel that they're not sensitized enough, and cases being registered with them is very difficult because they're also undersourced and understaffed. So there are like a trillion cases with the FIA, but nothing much is being done and about it because they are undersourced and understaffed and not sensitized enough. Apart from that, we also see that social media violence, even though now, uh, earlier when we started working in 2016, there was a lot of misconceptions around how online violence, or basically whatever happens online, isn't serious enough and you can ignore it. But now we see those repercussions happening in the offline spaces, and now we've seen cases like Kandil Baloch's case and so many other cases, that how violence itself has taken in offline discourse. So it's not just an online problem anymore. And what's unfortunate at this point is that when we talk to social media companies, and when you bring social media companies on board, social media companies aren't aware of what is going on. So for us, the kind of cases that we receive specifically on the helpline, there would just be a woman sitting and not doing anything, and somebody's made a fake profile of her, and somehow that can lead to an honor killing, and that can be a problem. And when we try to tell this to companies in the global north, they do not understand this context. So we have social media companies who are providing their services all across the world, but do not understand the context of each and every country or space where they're providing these services at. Uh, so there's that issue as well. And with the FIA, they don't have an MOU signed with the social media companies. So it's on the discretion of the social media companies sometimes if they will be providing data to the FIA or not. In a criminal investigation, if they need to expedite a case and get a judgment soon, so they need data from social media companies when an online violence is happening. And this cannot happen because there's no legal MOU that has been signed with the body, and then they are not liable to be giving this data to the FIA. So these are just some of the problems that I've highlighted. DRF itself is trying to work on a lot of things right now. We've been doing capacity building of women in terms of how to make themselves digitally secure, and not just with students, human rights defenders. We've been doing this with lawyers, human rights defenders, activists, women journalists, and we've also been trying to push to sensitize the FIA and law enforcement agencies more in terms of the cases that they've been receiving regarding
I do
women.
apologize, Ms. Kirat.
I feel
Can
like
I interrupt for a moment?
yeah, sure.
My apologies. May I request participants to kindly mute their speakers? We can hear background noises, which are a bit disruptive. So if the colleagues could, all colleagues except Ms. Sirat Khan, mute their mics, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saman. So I was just coming to the end, and I was just highlighting how there needs to be more work done with social media companies and the FIA, and not just them. I feel like online spaces need to be more. I mean, all right, I understand that these are spaces that are very critical in nature, and if there's a particular incident that has happened online, it stays online. That's something that we always tell people through our trainings, that just because one particular post is removed doesn't mean it can't go up again. So there's something that we need to do in terms of our own cyber security as well, and our own digital security. We need to make our accounts more safer. We need to basically try and follow digital security tips, in which we try stronger passwords, we try to have two-factor authentication, and we try to also not self-censor ourselves, but be very critical of the kind of speech that we are making. Because with the PICA ordinance coming in, even though it's not here yet, but it's still very easy to be implicated online. So it's very important to be sure of what we're talking about online, but also making sure that these spaces are there for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Sirat Khan, Senior Manager at Pakistan Digital Rights Foundation, for highlighting some of the key challenges in the cyberspace, in particular faced by women bloggers, human rights defenders, activists, and also sharing the recommendations to ensure expeditious remedying and expeditious redressal of some of these gaps. Ladies and gentlemen, it was back in year 2011, I guess, that from the United Nations, in collaboration with the civil society organization, we carried out a small study in 2 districts of Pakistan, looking at the impact of the then announced ordinance on honor-related violence and honor killings. And the findings were absolutely astounding. What we learned from these 2 districts was that even amongst the judiciary and the lawyers, knowledge about this ordinance was not more than 3 to 4%. Amongst law enforcers, their knowledge of the ordinance against human rights related violence and honor killing related violence and honor killings was minimal. We also learned that of the 92% cases that our field officers and our field surveyors were able to uncover, 92 of the 92% cases of violence against women, only 2% were ever reported. But we also wanted to know who were reporting these cases. Of the 2% cases that were reported, again, within these 2% reported cases, only 2% of the cases were reported by women themselves. 98% of the cases were reported by men. And this is not to say that there's anything inherently wrong with it, but it does raise the question of women's access to reporting of violence against women and girls, reporting of gender-based violence. We know that the data collection on violence against women and girls in Pakistan has not been an area which has been explored or progressed as compared to other initiatives on gender equality and empowerment of women and girls. There's also a clear recognition of the lack of sufficient data as a whole in Pakistan with regards to violence against women and gender-based violence. The importance of data collection on violence against women has been emphasized by the civil society, by women's movement, by Women's Action Forum at multiple platforms and repeatedly for a number of years. Just to give you one example, according to 2017 and 18 Pakistan Demographic and Health Survey, 28% of women aged 15 to 49 had experienced intimate partner violence in their lifetimes. But given that domestic violence is an issue, as we all know, shrouded in secrecy and shame, both sets of figures are likely a gross underestimation. Whether it is domestic violence or even violence, as we heard from Ms. Sirat Khan, in the cyberspace. The issue of lack of data continues to be raised by the committee, by the CEDAW committee in its concluding observations on Government of Pakistan's report on CEDAW. So we would like to hear from Madam Tahir Abdullah, who is an independent human rights defender, founding member of a number of women's rights and human rights forums and platforms, also member of Women Action Forum. She has a very rich experience of having worked with the United Nations system also. Madam Tahir Abdullah, over to you. What is the status of, and what are the questions around data on violence against women and girls? What are the key impediments that forbid and sort of hold the chain of reporting violence and then expeditious remedying or redressal of the complaints or referrals in that sense? Madam Tahir Abdullah, over to you.
Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon to all. Thank you very much, Dr. Salman Asif, for that very, very comprehensive introductory presentation almost. So your introductory remarks have made my job much easier. So I can, without getting into the background, I can just jump straight into my 5 thematic areas that I want to talk about in terms of data in Pakistan. 5 areas, 5 issues and problems that we have. And then I have a set of 10 recommendations, but given the very, very short time limit that one has been given as a panelist, I doubt if I'm going to be able to get to all 10 recommendations, in which case I'll just email them to your office. In terms of issues that we face regarding data, and I'm not going to focus only on violence against women, girls, and transgender persons, but I want to talk about women and issues of data in a more overall and holistic fashion. So our issues are the availability and collection of data, or the lack thereof, the disaggregation of the sex disaggregation of data, or the lack thereof, sins of commission, providing and writing and reporting wrong data. This is mostly by state and government institutions. Omission of data on women. So for example, there'll be non-disaggregated data and women will just be invisibilized. So we cease to exist. Almost 48.76, almost 49% of Pakistan's population just ceases to exist. So those are sins of omission. And last of all, using outdated statistics, data, and qualitative information in reporting. And the latest example we have is the 5th periodic report of the state of Pakistan as a party to CEDAW, and which was, of course, then, unfortunately, when a state party makes deliberately wrong representations of data and facts, as a member of the United Nations, as an entity, a state party to a convention like CEDAW or any other, then unfortunately, we are faced with a situation where non-government organizations, civil society activists, women's rights activists, academicians, researchers then are forced into the unenviable position of then writing shadow reports or alternate reports. And I just show, there are scores of such reports. Let me just share with you one of them, which was done in January 2020 in Pakistan Civil Society's alternative report on CEDAW 2020. What then happens is that we are forced into discrediting or refuting or rebutting the state party's report because it contains non-credible data, it contains outdated data, it omits certain data which is considered not very favorable to the state narrative on progress on CEDAW articles, and on previously it was MDGs, now it's the SDGs. So when we sign on such international goals, objectives, indicators, conventions, treaties, then we are bound to comply with them and to adhere to them and to report on them periodically, which then leads to all sorts of issues. The qualitative misrepresentation of facts is there too, but that is not my subject today, so I shall just flag that and let it go. When we dispute the data provided by state and government reports, we also must take into account, and I say this with all due respect, Dr. Asif and all UN colleagues who are present here in this webinar today, I as a civil society activist, as a human rights defender, as a researcher and author in my own right, as an academician, it makes us very sad when we see donor agencies, international financial institutions, the creditor agencies, and the lending agencies, just without any question, accept state and government reports with eyes closed as gospel truth. And that will lead to one of my recommendations, but I'll wait until I get to that. So we would want not just ourselves as civil society to be questioning and to remain vigilant and to remain watchdogs over reporting systems of the government and the state. We want everyone to do that. We want to be joined in this endeavor and this struggle of ours. We also have the non-reporting, as the chairperson of the NCHR and Dr. Salman Asif have already said, and Ms. Rukhshanda Naz, Advocate Rukhshanda Naz said it earlier. There is the non-reporting of gender-based violence and violence against women, girls, and trans persons, and people living with disabilities, differently abled persons. Of course, there are lots of cultural reasons. There's the shame, the stigma, the dishonor, all in inverted commas, associated with reporting of violence, gender-based violence, especially rape. I just want to show you a table which unfortunately remains true today. This was in the 2018 report published by the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan, the 2017 State of Human Rights in Pakistan. And this, if I can you see this? Can anyone see this? Dr. Asif, can you see this?
Well, thank you for displaying it, but
table,
it's difficult to see the figures.
Okay, I'll email it to you. This is just a table provided by the National Police Bureau to the United Nations and to CEDAW and to civil society. It says there were 3,000 rapes in the year 2017, 250 dishonor killings, 0 suicides, 0 rape and murder. I mean, it's just horrific when we know for a fact that around 2,000 dishonor killings take place in Pakistan at a conservative estimate, not reported in the media or to the police. So that's just one example. I could go on and on. I will not take up too much time on this particular issue. When we look at international rankings, the Global Gender Gap Index, the UN Human Development Report, so many others, the European Union, Reuters, etc., etc. Pakistan ranks either the second or the third last. This is in stark contrast to and contradiction of and in conflict with the narrative that accompanies government reports. For example, the MDGs report in 2013, which was supported by the UN system, the so many other reports that the state presents, the UPR reports that are periodically presented to the Human Rights Council. I could go on and on. I'm going to stop right there with the issues, because there was in 1989, 89 and 90, Canadian CEDAW funded a project with then Federal Bureau of Statistics, which is now the Pakistan Bureau of Statistics, to right some of these wrongs, and these issues that I have enumerated above, and to provide sex disaggregated and factually correct data on women's issues. Unfortunately, as soon as the funding, that was just a small project, very small funding, and as soon as that ended, that project went out the window too. So while there were a few achievements in awareness raising on the need for sex disaggregated data and accurate data, we can't talk of it as a successful project. Baseline, the lack of baseline data impacts upon the measurement of the achievement of goals and targets and indicators and benchmarks. This I'm now referring to the SDGs. When you don't have accurate baselines, how are you going to measure successful achievement of any indicator at all? It's something to think about. We don't have baselines mostly. They're not done. It's not a checklist like the PC1 documents of the Planning Commission before any project is submitted for government funding. Gender responsive budgeting is not there. Those are data issues. Gender responsive budgeting is a data issue. Malafide distortions and moving the goalposts. This is an issue of poverty. And it goes all the way back to General Pervez Musharraf's presidency. He remained president for 9 years, from 1999 to 2008. Under him, there was Prime Minister Shaukat Aziz, who moved the goalposts to change the definition of poverty. And what happened? The feminization of poverty got hidden under the rug. The ratio is 3 to 1. For every 4 Pakistanis living in poverty, 3 are women and 1 is a man. Who knows this? Why is there no dissemination of sex disaggregated data, either by the government or by state institutions such as the commissions? Or, why does the media not investigate and dig it out? And if I can dig it out, everyone can dig it out too. I don't have access to any confidential classified information, just a researcher doing my own digging. Then there's the issue of encouraging women to report crimes. This cannot be done, especially in the rural areas where we have feudal and tribal jirgas and panchayats, whose, the feudal landlord's son will rape the woman, the domestic worker in their home, and then will not allow her to report it. So it's not just a lack of education. It is a multi-pronged issue. It's a holistic issue. It requires a holistic, not just saying, okay, let us have women police stations and therefore women will come forward to report. They will not. They will be preventing from reporting. And if you're dishonor killed, you're dead. Who's going to report? Very quickly, I don't know, Dr. Asif, how much time, whether I've taken too much time, but very quickly, I'm just going to do it like bullet points or cookie points, if you like, for us peace activists. Very quickly, my recommendations are: we need political commitment, policy and laws for data, accuracy of data, to remove the sins of commission and omission and lack of sex disaggregation that I mentioned right at the start. We need inclusive decision-making. Why are we not part of the CEDAW report writing exercise by the state? Why are we not part of the UPR report writing? Where are the United Nations rules gone out the window that non-government organizations, civil society activists, researchers, academicians, the media, it's supposed to be a transparent, honest, open exercise. That's not happening. That's not happening. We are forced to waste our time on shadow and alternative reports saying this is the correct data. 2,500 women were killed for dishonor killing, not 350 as reported by the state. Why does the state not use international and national data sets which are credible and have international credibility and acceptability. For example, the Oxford Poverty Research Institute does across the board countrywide rankings of poverty and sex disaggregated poverty and area disaggregated poverty. We need to recognize the subtle difference between sex disaggregated data and pushing women into goal 5 of the SDGs, which in Urdu we call the Zanana Dabba, which means the women's compartment in a train. I don't want to be in a Zanana Dabba. I want mainstreaming of all 17 SDGs and all of CEDAW, all our policies and 5-year development plans. And we don't want separate women's compartments, the Zanana Dabba. We want total integration, total mainstreaming, gender responsive budgeting. We want Parliament to enact a law to define discrimination. We signed and ratified CEDAW in 1996, 26 years ago. Up to today, this constitution of Pakistan does not have a definition of discrimination inserted into it through a parliamentary act. That is absolutely basic and fundamental. We must, rather than have women police stations, separate, standalone, with much lesser power, authority, and mandates than male or regular police stations, we need to have women's units in every single police station. We don't want under 3% of Pakistan's police force, the police service of Pakistan, to have just 3% women. We want there to be women in every one of the 50,000 police stations in the length and breadth of Pakistan. We want to encourage women to report gender-based violence and violence against them this is a tall order and I can dream on, right? Right, Dr. Asif, I'm allowed to dream on. By encouraging women that your honor, a man's honor does not lie in the body of a woman. A woman's honor and respect lies within herself. And if she is violated through crimes of violence, it is our right. It is our duty to go and report it, irrespective of what my father, my mother, my brother, my husband, my son might want me to do or not to do. This is something that the state must do through a lot of awareness raising campaigns through the mass media and the social media. Technology, I have in front of me, Dr. Asif, something that you, data reporting gaps by the United Nations, where a lot of technology is being pushed, that, oh, digitize this, computerize this, and no, I'm sorry. There's an English proverb or an English maxim, and with all due respect to everyone present here, garbage in equals garbage out. If I am not getting honest, factual, accurate, verifiable, credible data, then I will put into my computer that wrong data and it will spew out wrong data. So technology can help. Yes, computers will help. Smartphones do help, but that is not the whole story. Honest reporting and total reporting is what will help. And the donor agencies and financial institutions, lending agencies must not accept at face value what they are provided by state institutions and the Pakistan Bureau of Statistics. And last of all, thank you for allowing me to carry on to my last recommendation. It may seem like a joke, but I am 500% serious. I think globally, it was not present in the MDGs. Unfortunately, despite the bitter lessons learned from the MDGs, which Pakistan failed to achieve, this goal, the 18th goal that I'm now recommending, was not added as an 18th SDG, but I am saying that for the next, after 2030, which Pakistan shows no signs of achieving up to 2030, I'm recommending, Dr. Asif, for you to recommend to His Excellency, the Secretary General of the United Nations, to add a new goal to the next round of development goals. And it goes like this: ensure that national and country reports by states parties contain accurate, honest, verifiable data and qualitative information. Thank you very much.
Madam Tahir Abdullah, thank you very much indeed for this truly insightful presentation, for highlighting the challenges, and also for your recommendations that are very well noted. We have with us, before I open the forum for our participants to seek any further clarity, reflections, or share any comments or queries, could I request all the participants to kindly switch their cameras on just for a few seconds. We would like to take a big screenshot. My colleague Amna Sayed will take the screenshot for our tweet, please. Thank you. Amna, let us know when you're done.
Sure, Salman Sahab, I am now going to take the picture. Ma'am Rakshanda, if you can also please turn on your video. I don't know if you can hear us. Perfect. I've taken the picture. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have with us our colleague from UN Women, Ms. Saman Ahsan. Ms. Ahsan, do you have any reflections that you'd like to share? I think we lost her. Amna, would you like to share any reflections, or if you have any queries? I should have introduced Ms. Amna Sayed earlier. Ms. Amna Sayed is one of our key researchers at the Decentralization, Human Rights and Local Governance team within UNDP. She has just put together a truly riveting report on harmonization and cohesion of human rights data mechanisms in Pakistan.
Thank you so much, Samansa, for the introduction, and thank you so much, all the panelists today. This was such an interesting and such a riveting conversation, and I'm so glad to be, attending this. As we were going through, the government representatives and also human rights defenders, as a lot of things that Ma'am Tahir Abdullah mentioned. I was just thinking about this in my head. A lot of times we expect the state to respond to women, gender-related issues in a certain way. However, there's just a clear idea that the state itself is embedded in a patriarchal system, and so somehow we're expecting, a system that was made to perpetuate patriarchy undo the patriarchy. So is that an unrealistic expectation at the end of the day? I just want to hear thoughts of our esteemed guests today, and share their thoughts on this idea. Thank you.
So I was just saying that we can start from Madam Tahir Abdullah for a brief comment on this, and then we can move on to Madam Rabi Javeri and Mesirat Khan, and later Madam Rakshanda Nas.
Amna, I admire your enthusiasm and your idealism. And I wrote very facetiously, dream on. But after 42 years of struggle, I am still continuing that struggle, in continuance of which I marched yesterday in Islamabad, despite death threats from the right-wing extremist militant religious groups. 5 groups converged on us yesterday, and we continued marching. 5 groups converged on us, physically converged on us. So yes, patriarchy must be smashed, misogyny must be countered, sexism has to be fought and struggled against, and we continue. Advocate Roshanda Naz and I are continuing our struggle for the last 4 decades, and she for 3 decades and me for four plus decades. But let us be realistic. Before we can consider that the patriarchy is smashed and misogyny is eliminated and discrimination is done away with, let us at least start with the first building block of defining what constitutes discrimination in Pakistan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madam Rabia?
I agree with what Amna is saying, that when you have patriarchy is of course woven into everything, in how you collect data, how you manifest data, how you share it, how you said in your statement. And certainly civil society, media, everybody who is committed to human rights plays a strong role in whatever way to address the issues of patriarchy. It's not going to finish tomorrow. But certainly if the flag is kept high, and I think the dialogue and the debate is kept alive, and that is, hats off to civil society to keep that debate alive, then till that debate is alive and that voice keeps going, you will certainly not maybe end it, but certainly poke enough pins in it to get some change along the way. So, but that is a huge challenge when you gather data, because the perspective of philosophy always determines how you pick and choose data. There are always ways in which you can manipulate that data, certainly, by everybody. And they're both pros and cons. So, but if you keep the, I think forums in which such as this, in which you talk about the problems and you highlight them, and maybe all the recommendations won't happen. Maybe one will happen, but it'll be the big building block for improvement and success. So that's my 2 bits. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Ms. Sirat Khan, would you have any reflection on this?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's very ironic that, and it's completely true that the state is enforcing patriarchy, but we're asking that it smashes it too. But I feel like as human rights defenders and activists, we take too much on. We are doing a lot already, and we're trying our best to, get the word out there and talk about in our respective fields what is going on. And we will try our best and we continue to strive and do the work that we're doing, but we also need to make the state aware of what they're doing. And I feel like until and unless we don't have conversations like these and we keep on telling them again and again that, this is something that they're doing which is causing harm to us and our community and marginalized communities, nothing can be done. So yeah, like Ms. Rabia said and Ms. Tahir Abdullah said that, even if it's one recommendation, even if it's 2 recommendations, we need to keep on striving and we need to make the state accountable and transparent of what they're doing. Because otherwise we have so many laws, even in terms of online spaces, we have this law which is supposedly great, it's for women, it's going to give them all of their rights, but it's being used against them. So I feel like we need to have these conversations more and we need to hold the state accountable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madam Rakshandanaz, you have the last word.
Okay, I just share 2 quick example. The one, because I was part of civil society delegation in in 2008 for CEDAW periodic review. So at that time, women were having only 27% women were reported as having CNIC. So you see the difference after Benazir income support program and now the SAS project. So you will see the number of the women is much higher having CNIC. And the second, because I was collecting testimonies from North Waziristan. So at that time, one of my colleagues shared his experience when there was no women in the Nadra desk. So they allow men to for the thumb impression. So the one thing, we experience patriarchy in our homes, we experience patriarchy in our community, because we are the product of patriarchy. So we know how we will hit the patriarchy. Because today, when I was talking to civil servants, they bring argument of Allama Iqbal's poetry for on one of the issue. So I counter that argument with Ghani Khan poetry. So I think this is we have the champion. So within the patriarchal system, we need to identify the champion, and these champions should be our voices. For that reason, whenever I engage with women, on the other side, I try to engage with men as well, with youth as well, because we need to fill that gap. Otherwise, other people will fill this gap. So I think I'm coming from the very conservative, religiously and culturally, from the region and from the family wise. We know how we will use people within the patriarchy in our favor. Like even when we were working against women trafficking, so Maulana Hassan Jan was with us for ensuring there will be proper marriage deed to be filled out, and this bride price issue should be bring into the notice of the registration authority. So I think strategies are there, and I believe there where is a hardship, you will find there are the best example from that area as well. Only we need to know what we want, how we can use some of our strategies with incentive. I'm not talking about distributing money, but development project, development program where the women can enhance their economic status in the community, and then using the champions. So I believe you can find champion from across the board, and inshallah we will overcome some of the issues because of patriarchy and our extremism we are facing.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Rakshandanaz. We heard about the issue of champions. You said champions, but today we are in the esteemed company of champions such as yourself, such as Madam Rabia Javeri Aga, such as Madam Tahir Abdullah, Sirat Khan. And on behalf of UNDP and the United Nations system, I thank you for the generosity with which you shared your truly insightful reflections. You highlighted the challenges and also gave us recommendations for expeditious follow-ups. On behalf of UNDP, it gives me a lot of pleasure, and with much gratitude and humility, I say to you that we stand ready to partner with you, to cooperate with you in this journey. Ms. Sirat Khan has just shared a little note in the chat box, and to me that note really sums up the spirit of today's set of deliberations. Ms. Sirat Khan says, we will never give in or give up, our struggle continues. Faiz Sahib said, chale chalo ke wo manzil abhi nahi aayi, but there is much to celebrate also. I think we have crossed many, many bridges through paragons, icons, champions such as yourselves. So we celebrate, but we also commit and collectively envision to move forward in line with a shared vision. I thank you all very much. And before we conclude, I wish you all a very, very happy, further empowering, further catalyzing International Women's Day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. God bless. Bye-bye.
Salam.